there is a reality connected with our feelings, and those feelings are real in crisis. We hurt, we suffer, we wish it were different, we wish something was better, we wish things were changed, and all that is true. But we don't understand in those moments God's perspective. Because as badly as He hurts with us whenever we hurt, because whenever you read this story, as Jesus sympathizes with His friends and they're hurting and crying and weeping over the death of Lazarus, even though He's about to raise him from the dead, Jesus weeps because of the sorrow, because of the hurt, because of that agony. And that is there's no question that's there. But God's perspective is not about our feelings. God's perspective is about our spiritual walk. And people who don't know who God is simply do not understand that. It takes a growth and it takes a level of maturity to realize that there is more to life, there is more to the plan, there is more from God's perspective than just how I feel about a tragedy. Even though the feelings are real, even though the feelings are important, even though through the feelings, God sympathizes and empathizes and is there for us, it doesn't mean He's going to change what happens because of our feelings. And yet in the face of those crises, in the face of that hurt, in the face of that tragedy, or those tragedies in our life, we may get a whole different perspective if we start looking at it through the eyes of God, realizing a level of thanksgiving in it. I think back in my own life, and I remember whenever my first wife said our marriage was over. And going to all kinds of counselors and all kinds of psychologists and all kinds of whatever, hoping to save the marriage and it not happening. And thinking, I'm a minister, I'm a Christian, God is not going to He is going to restore this marriage because if nothing else for the sake of that boy and that girl. And there was a night that I was praying about stuff, and I remember having this incredible spiritual peace, realizing that God was going to take care of things. And my interpretation of that, meaning that God was going to restore the marriage. Until I was talking to one of my professors and telling him about that, and he said, be careful that you don't put God in a box, because that peacefulness does not mean a restoration of marriage. It means a peacefulness that you're going to be taken care of. And I'm going, and that means restoration of the marriage. He's going, maybe. It wasn't. I remember at the age of 29, my 29th birthday, waking up in the spare bedroom of my brother's house, 10 days after my wife says our marriage is over, opening the door, and my sister-in-law had written in crayon, happy birthday, Jeff, or happy 29th birthday, Jeff, on the door of my bedroom. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, this is great. 29th birthday, this is exactly what I pictured it was going to be. And yet, if that doesn't happen, I never know who you are. If that doesn't happen, my life never takes that course to where I find Becky. And let me tell you, how do I say this nicely, being recorded both audioly and video. When I married the second time, I married up. Is that safe to say? Is that okay to say? I think most of the guys in this room understand what I'm saying because you did too. But I married up. And we've been married 10 years, and I still don't really understand why she married me. Because this woman has more talent than I could possibly ever have. She never married. The Lord never led that until I come along, and I'm thinking, why? And there she is. I never enjoy her if I don't go through that crisis first. And because we get so caught up in our feelings and blaming God, and things aren't the way I wanted it to be, and things aren't the way that I have foreseen it to be, and things aren't the way that it should be according to my will, so therefore God is horrible and terrible and I blame Him. We get so caught up in all of that that we forget that His perspective is on the spiritual level, and we forget, as we get caught up in the feelings, to not step back and give thanks to God even in the face of crisis. Now I understand that a person who does not know Christ, would walk out of here and look at me and say that I am a fool. I love listening. I love listening to different talk shows. I don't know if you know of a guy named Charles Jaco or not. Jaco is a political liberal, but he was talking this week on the radio about he is a complete atheist. And you know, as far as he's concerned, religion at every level is stupid. And I'm listening to him and I'm thinking about this sermon, and I'm thinking about this point, and I'm thinking this would be, without trying to sound negative toward him or anybody else that believes like that, over his head. Because if I don't believe in God and things don't go the way I want them to go, it is absolutely negative. But if I understand who God is, I recognize that even in the negative, positive can come from it, and I can find a level of thanksgiving even in that. Does that make sense? If it does, then thank God for your faith. Even at that level, a level of thanksgiving. But there's a final thing I want us to look at. You're in John 11. I want you to turn back a few pages to Luke chapter 17. In the church Bible, it's page 728. Luke chapter 17. A very famous passage of Scripture that is read a lot and studied a lot and preached about a lot around Thanksgiving. Because it is, again, a great example in the case study of human nature. Chapter 17, verse 11. On his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee, and he was going into a village. 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and cried out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Yes, go show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself on Jesus' feet and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where's the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" And he said to this man, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." It was law that if you had leprosy, you had to announce your presence. If you were around somebody, they could not get close to you because they did not know, still don't know, what causes leprosy. So the only thing they knew how to do was isolate you if you had leprosy. And if you were traveling or if you met somebody who was traveling, you had to announce as soon as you recognized their presence was there. You had to announce that you were there. You had to announce that you had leprosy. You had to announce that they had to stay away from you. These 10 guys, and what happened a lot of times with people with leprosy, because we are emotional creatures and we want that bonding even whenever we're cast out, people who had leprosy would, of course, colonize and stay together. There's 10 guys. They recognize Jesus. His popularity is everywhere. People recognize who he is. At a distance, they cry out to him to have pity on them. And Jesus says, "Go show yourself to the priest." That, again, was law. People could, every now and then, people who had leprosy would actually get better, and the leprosy would leave them. They didn't know what causes it. They didn't know why they got better. But if they did, they had to go to the priest, and the priest had them go through a series of cleansing and go through a series of reinstatement into society. So again, because they didn't know what caused leprosy, and they didn't want anybody to get leprosy, so they had to go through this incredible ritual to re-enter society. So Jesus tells them, go start the process and go tell the priest. Now, what is interesting about this study, or what is interesting about this event, is that whenever he tells them to go show themselves to the priest, they are still leprous. There's no reason to go show ourselves to the priest because nothing has happened. And yet we're told on their journey, on their way, as they are going, they are then cleansed. And it's always interesting to me how that could possibly happen. Was it an instant thing? Is it one of those things that if Jesus is over there and they're walking along and whenever they get to 50 feet away from him, 51 feet, they're cleansed? Is it something that as they step, their strength is beginning to be restored, and 10 steps later they're completely healed? I don't know what that is. It would be pretty cool to know how that happened. Was it an instant, or was it a gradual, over the next 20 paces, everything came back?